There comes a moment when actions speak louder than any explanation. It's not about words or justifications. It's about presence. It's about choice. Someone who used to pull away now stays. The details change. The attention comes unasked. The care is shown in the little things. And the silence, which used to hurt, now comforts. Those who always gave their all finally begin to be seen. Reciprocity happens effortlessly, as if it had always been there, even when it wasn't before. Time doesn't erase what has happened, but it transforms. And when there is truth in gestures, there is no doubt. Things are different. It feels right. Nothing is said out loud, but everything is felt. It's as if the universe returns, in the form of presence, all that was insistence, waiting, and weariness. Now it is different. Care exists, and it deserves to be accepted. There comes a time when what hurts no longer screams as loudly. The sound that fills the space is no longer the clamor of demands, but rather a gesture that doesn't need declaring. Those who observe from the outside may not understand, but there is change in the eyes, in the hands, in the habits. Someone who used to be absent starts to remain. It's not about sudden transformation. It's almost imperceptible at first. A little care here, a calmer look there. It can't be explained. It can only be felt. And for those who have spent too long insisting, offering, trying, this means so much more than words. Because it was never a request. There were no demands. It was time, perhaps the weariness, perhaps the risk of losing, that brought to light something that had always been on the outskirts: recognition. Now it's not about promises, it's about demonstrating, without being perfect, without grand speeches, but with a consistency that didn't exist before. Those who always gave love without measure finally begin to notice the return, not as a reward, but as justice. The gestures change. The time, once scarce, becomes available. The touch arrives gently. The presence does not flee. No more excuses are heard. What exists now is a silent commitment, revealed in the details, in the way one listens, in the way one stays. Absence has ceased to be routine, and what takes its place is something new, nameless, yet felt. There are no guarantees, but there is effort. There is no perfection, but there is presence. And for those who have lived on the edge of waiting and giving up, this changes everything. Because at some point the body becomes tired of begging for affection. The soul grows weary of waiting for someone to see the obvious. But when at last that someone begins to see, what is felt is a mix of relief, distrust, and hope, all at once. It's natural to doubt. After all, when you've grown accustomed to neglect, kindness is startling. When you've waited too long, presence seems temporary. But it's no longer about fear. It's about observing and understanding that now there are different signs: the way time is dedicated, the way conversations don't slip away, the care in words, the genuine concern. Everything begins to tell another story. It's no longer about surviving within a relationship. It's about breathing together. Reciprocity, which once seemed a distant ideal, becomes possible. Not because someone has completely changed, but because they have finally decided to do things differently. Those looking in from the outside might call it a new beginning. But for those living it, it's more than that. It's the start of a bond that doesn't require sacrifice to exist. It's a kind of presence that doesn't wound, doesn't weigh down, doesn't escape. And even without saying, "I'm here," everything about the other confirms it. The arguments decrease, the tone of conversations shifts, routine stops being a burden and becomes a choice. No one needs to ask for attention. It happens. No one needs to beg for care. It comes. And it's not because everything is resolved, but because, at last, there is a genuine desire to build, even if pain still exists, even if the scars are still fresh. Now there is also truth, and that changes everything. Those who truly love don't disappear when things get tough. Those who feel deeply learn to stay. And once they learn, they don't repeat what caused pain. This is the moment, the time when what felt like a burden becomes relief, the time when what was a wound transforms into a foundation. No one knows what comes next, but the now. The now is strong, the now is clear, the now deserves to be lived, with calm, with maturity, with reciprocity. Because when love arrives quietly, it asserts itself without needing to raise its voice, and those who feel know. It's not about forgetting what has been. It's about looking and seeing that it's no longer that way. Care exists, and it deserves to be accepted. It's possible to feel when someone starts to stay, even if they say nothing, even if they promise nothing. The body reveals it. The gaze lingers longer. The touch, once automatic, now carries intention. The presence, which once only served to fulfill routine, begins to have weight, depth, and truth, and then everything changes. Not because the past has been erased, but because the present doesn't repeat it. There's a new silence now, a silence that doesn't scream absence, but confirms presence. And it's in this gap between fear and surrender that a new way of being together is born. It's not perfect, it's not constant, but it's real. The pain is still there, latent, like a memory refusing to become a recollection. But now it shares space with something else, the feeling that, finally, someone understood. And when that happens, when understanding comes effortlessly, without demands, without manipulation, it's as if something inside finally stops fighting. The body relaxes, the mind slows down, the heart, weary from giving without return, begins gradually to receive. This isn't about a happy ending, not yet, but it is indeed about a new beginning, this time with reciprocity, with a desire to make it work, with actions that speak for themselves, because those who genuinely want don't complicate, they don't flee, they don't create distance when the other needs closeness the most. Those who want stay, and learn to stay, even when you don't understand everything, even when you're scared, even when you've made too many mistakes. Because there's a kind of love that doesn't plead, but it also doesn't give up. It simply endures, silently, until the other is ready. And when the other is, the connection shifts in tone. It's no longer about proving anything. It's about showing. In the day-to-day, in the details, a cup of coffee made before the other wakes up. A brief message asking how the day went. A glance that seeks the other before any words are spoken. These are small gestures, simple, but they carry everything that was never said, because in the end, that's what matters. It's not what is promised, but what is delivered. It's not what is spoken, but what is repeated. In silence, in consistency, in truth. And when someone starts to deliver, even without having promised, trust is rebuilt, not all at once, but piece by piece, with hesitation, with caution, but also with intent, because loving again, after so much exhaustion, is an act of courage. But allowing oneself to be loved is even more. And this moment, when it arrives, demands full presence. No masks, no justifications, just presence. Those observing from the outside might call it reconciliation, but for those living it from the inside, it's a rebirth, almost invisible, almost sacred. And there's no way to explain this with words. There are feelings that only silence can translate. And it's in that silence that the most real things are built. Without noise, without urgency, without haste. Trust doesn't return suddenly. It approaches slowly, without asking for space. And for that reason, it conquers. It's no longer about idealizing. That has passed. What remains now is what's in front of the eyes, in the present moment. And what is there is different. It's not about being better, nor making up for what was missing. It's about being consistent, being stable even in the face of uncertainty. It's about someone who chooses not to leave, and who doesn't need to say that. The choice lies in the gestures, in the way one listens, in the attention to details that were once ignored, in the type of presence that doesn't weigh down but supports. There's a new time now, calmer, more genuine, more attentive. Anxiety no longer screams like it used to, because the fear of being abandoned is starting to lose its grip, and the fear of loving is beginning to yield space to the desire to try, even without guarantees. It is here that one realizes, what was once weariness is now a support point. What was once a demand is now an exchange. What once hurt now teaches. There's no longer an attempt to change the other. There's acceptance of what is possible. And when the possible becomes a choice, it no longer seems like so little. Because the essential doesn't come with effort. It comes with intention. Those who want to show it. Those who feel take care. Those who understand stay. Not out of obligation, but out of truth. And this truth, even when silent, fills spaces that words could never reach. The daily routine changes, but not through grand gestures. It's in the little things. The meal is already served. The phone doesn't divide attention. The touch of a hand is firm, no longer absent. The conversation doesn't end when it starts to get difficult. These are the things that aren't requested. They simply happen when the feeling is real. And even if there's tiredness, there's still care. Even if there's still a wound, there's tenderness for it. Someone decided not to run away from what has been done, and more importantly, decided not to repeat it. This is the turning point, not when everything is resolved, but when someone chooses to resolve together, without putting it off, without ignoring, without letting the other face everything alone, like before. When there is repair, love strengthens, not because it became something else, but because it stopped being half. And it's in that moment, when the surrender finds balance, that the relationship starts to breathe on its own, without suffocating anyone, without demanding more than can be given, without begging for the bare minimum. Reciprocity doesn't make noise, but those who have lived without it know exactly when it arrives. Time now carries a different quality. It is no longer the time of delays, of disappearance, of responses left for later. It's the time for presence. And the most beautiful thing about it all is that, even without promises, someone has finally started to care. The way they look at you, the way they listen, the way they stay even when the other is silent. Because those who truly love learn to be quiet too. Not to distance themselves, but to respect the space. Not to punish, but to embrace. The connection that arises from this doesn't need a definition. It's felt, it pulsates, it sustains. And that, in itself, is already healing. There are no formal apologies, no long conversations about everything that went wrong. The past, which for so long was a ghost between the two, no longer sits at the table. It's there, but no longer commands. The reconnection didn't come with explanations. It came with actions. It came when the other chose not to repeat the easiest mistake, to disappear. It's at this point that everything changes. You don't notice it all at once, but there's a calmness that arrives unannounced. It's not euphoria, nor a rekindled passion. It's something else, something more mature, more sober, more solid. Perhaps because, for the first time, no one needs to prove themselves all the time. Perhaps because they have seen what it's like to be on the brink of the end. And now what exists is choice, without obligation, without guilt, without emotional manipulation. The choice to care even when it's hard, to listen even when there is resistance, to understand even when not everything is clear. The choice to stay. It's that simple, and at the same time it's everything. What once seemed fragile now sustains, and this doesn't happen by magic. It happens because there was a movement. Someone began to observe the other with more humanity. They stopped seeing only the flaws and started to notice the effort. It's not about forgetting what hurt, but about not feeding off it anymore. The pain served its purpose, alerted, broke, exposed, now it retreats, and gives way to rebuilding, and rebuilding isn't easy. It demands patience. It requires silencing the ego, holding back the rush, dealing with memories that resurface uninvited. But the desire to get it right, when it's sincere, transcends all of that. And it comes. It comes in the simplest gestures, in the way someone waits for the other without intruding, in the ability to listen without rebutting, in the effort to understand before defending oneself. To an outsider, it may seem like nothing has changed, but those who live it know. Because the small miracles don't show up in photographs, they reveal themselves in details that only those who love notice. The way the name is spoken now with more ease, the touch that lasts 1 second longer, the hug that happens for no reason, the care that no longer comes as compensation, but as routine. These are the signs, and when they appear, they make it clear. There is a real presence. There is a living bond. And perhaps the most beautiful part is this. There's no need to ask anymore because the other has already understood and acts with consistency, with commitment, with truth. even if there are still bad days, even if fear sometimes visits at night, even if not everything is resolved. What exists now is something unprecedented. Someone finally understands the difference between being beside and being together. And this difference changes everything. Being beside is physical presence. It's routine, it's habit, it's inertia. Being together is something else. It's listening to what hasn't been said. It's respecting what can't yet be explained. It's supporting, even if you don't know why there's pain. It's not demanding answers. It's staying, especially when it would be easier to walk away. That's what transforms relationships. It's not the trips, the gifts, the posts. It's the presence that remains when the other one falls apart. It's the affection that shows up when no one is watching. It's choosing not to repeat the same gestures that hurt before. And when everything seems to have run its course, that's when what's left is revealed. Not everything needs to be said. Some connections can't be explained, they are felt. It's in that space between what has been and what can still be that true care is shown. Not as a promise, but as action. Not as relief, but as a daily choice. Maybe there are still scars, but now there are hands that aren't afraid to touch them, and that is more than enough to keep going. It's not about a happy ending. It's about presence, truth, and reciprocity built in silence. It's about a love that remained when it would have been easier to walk away. If this theme resonated with you in any way, if you've experienced something similar, if you're still living it, or if each word felt like it was yours, comment below. Sometimes just sharing can help organize the pain. Share this video with someone you know needs to hear this today. It could be just what someone needs to not give up. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming content. We'll still talk a lot about feelings that no one has the courage to confess. And of course, if this touched you, leave a like. It costs nothing and helps this message reach those who are still waiting to be seen. Because deep down, everyone just wants this, to be seen and finally, to be cared for.